Okay, welcome everyone to the online opening of the exhibition project Interfacing New Heavens, a collaboration between the Javits Art Center at the University of Pretoria and Artists and Labs program at the Zurich University of the Arts. The project is supported by the Pro Helvetia in Johannesburg, as well as the Embassy of Switzerland in Pretoria, South Africa. The exhibition brings together two different positions that contemplate the entanglement of science and art, indigenous knowledge systems, and their inquiry within the discursive terrain of astronomy. The series of works by Vanessa Lorenzo and Tebogo George Mahashe reflect on the possibilities of these interactions and their effect on our present. The project broaches the possibility to think of and around questions of bodies, exobodies, and or life forms, particles, and their relationship to celestial horizons, extraterrestrial matter, practices of astronomical observation, both ancestral and contemporaneous, as well as the space of dreaming as a site of research. Thus teasing out attended questions of voice, sonicity, the agency of objecthood, both human and non-human. The entanglement of these concerns signify towards the consideration of biopolitical life within contemporaneity. The artists grapple with form whilst teasing out a certain beleaguerment born from our uncertain present. What Anna Tsing and Donna Haraway call the plantation Ocene, and or what we might consider the Anthropocene, a contested site where frictions occur, both otherworldly and deeply personal. Of interest for us as the curatorial team was a certain juxtaposition of disparate positions brought together into effective proximity with each other, almost not unlike a hazy dream sequence quite out of time and place. The project attempts to stage a break. It is an intermission of sorts, a certain disposition or predilection to dwell in an unknowable landscape, both infinite and boundless. This strategy, a recourse to unpredictability, in turn could allow one to develop a criticality in engaging different forms of knowledge production and their tenets. In thinking of within and around the ambit of artistic research, one notes the many contradictions the term encapsulates. One is beset by a series of incoherencies. The practice in and of itself presents one with a multitude of aporia concerning, but not limited to established scientific inquiry. To designate a label or attempt to categorize these sensibilities limits the profuse visual and lexical utterances one is confronted by. One could think of artistic research as a continuing and discontinuing sway of effect and intuition, an idiosyncratic and interdisciplinary situation that appropriates features for myriad epistemologies whilst also maligning their imposed limits. The work of art under these conditions can be thought of as having a life of its own, an agency or genesis besieged by its own logic or dictates. Within these two positions, visuality and observation are thought of otherwise. In a way, they both inverted and refracted back to us. It might be prudent to think of their artistic research process as an indeterminate xenosphere or determinant of knowledge systems, a certain xenoepistemics, sinuous and unraveling gestures that might not arrive at their intended destination. One thinks of these engagements as peripatetic and journeys that trouble one's sense of location, locating oneself otherwise in alien and other territory. I consider within my own curatorial practice how these propositions might be taken up as a metaphor in thinking about the development of new institutionalisms and future propositions that guide and inform our own research and exhibition process, as well as ethos, and forms under the leadership of both our CEO, Legeto Makola, and our curatorial director, Gabi Ngobo. Vacillating between a complex and multiplied virtuality and precarious stellar landscape, Vanessa Lorenzo's work, Always Calling Home, interrogates multifaceted embodiments of subjectivity, both human and non-human. Her project utilizes the practice of deep listening to think of the link, open quote, the link between matter and meaning, radical togetherness of alienated bodies and territories. Lorenzo's moving images, sounds, auctioned celestial matter, both luminescent and gleaming, are assembled not unlike a convocation of effulgent and incorporeal symbols, always calling home. They collide together with and amongst each other, virtually constructing a cacophonous and intangible composition. A kaleidoscope of silhouettes, matter, profiles, effects, and senses come together. Open quote, whether celestial nor terrestrial, Wandering rocks are core to different meaning-making processes in disparate cultures. Both attempt to predict or simulate critical events that stress out communities' civilizations, close quote. Deploying traveling in the space of the dreamscape as research methodology, George Mahashe's project, Libitla Langaka, imagines the possibility of a different relationship with visuality. The artist thinks about ritual objects of observation within Kelobedu practice as sites of encounter. Open quote. Mahashe's online prompt is a focus on the process of creating, researching, or navigating a metadata site. Mahashe's preoccupation is with comprehending his own relation to knowledge about the cosmos and the contemporary, focusing on the capacity to imagine technological innovations as a key site in recognizing a broader understanding of indigenous knowledge systems around astronomy, both as an observation of the stars for cycle keeping, but also as a measuring tool in the same way that an astrophysicist might be attempting to measure and characterize exoplanets. George's project is an obsession with optical phenomena and devices utilized to comprehend the aforementioned phenomena, both within a dreamscape and or reality. With their presentations, we think around working methods, research processes, and possible detours elsewhere. Welcome. Thank you. I will allow my colleagues and co-curators of Interfacing New Heavens, Florian Fischer and Erin Heidegger, to give a short statement on the process.
Thank you very much, Sinetemba, for this amazing introduction. And thank you also on the warm welcome to everybody, visible and invisible to me here in this digital space in between. I'm Erin Heidegger, and I'm head of the Artists in Labs program at the Zurich University of the Arts. And together with my colleagues, with my dear colleagues, as you heard, we are the co-curators of this exhibition and also process Interfacing New Heavens.
Good evening, everybody, and a warm welcome from my side too. My name is Florian Fischer, and I'm a research associate at the Artists in Labs program, and I'm also a co-curator of Interfacing New Heavens. I will give you a short introduction into the history of this project and also about the Artists in Labs program. The Artists in Labs program is part of the Department of Cultural Analysis at Zurich University of the Arts. And we aim to promote sustainable collaboration between artists and scientists of all disciplines in Switzerland and worldwide. The Artists in Labs program was founded in 2003, and since then it has been facilitating a specific form of artistic research by way of long-term residencies for artists in scientific laboratories and research institutes. We aim to share these residencies with the broad public, and therefore, whenever possible, we participate in exhibitions, symposia, and workshops. We also produce short documentary films on every residency, which you can also see now on javid.up.art. And we publish books regularly as a way of communicating the transdisciplinary processes. Our long-term collaborations aim to provide artists with an opportunity to critically engage with the sciences and their experimental and aesthetic dimensions. This includes explorations of the side of the laboratory, as well as a range of scientific topics, methods, and technologies. Starting initially in Switzerland, the program has built up new collaborations in different regions of the world from 2010 on. In 2017, we had the amazing opportunity to travel to Johannesburg for an intense and carefully planned research trip to universities in different regions of the country, to museums, art spaces, and festivals. This research trip was organized by Pro Helvetia Johannesburg and Jackie Friedenthal, who is a science and technology counselor of the Embassy of Switzerland in South Africa. Accompanied by South African artist Markus Neustetter, we presented our concept of 3 months Artists in Labs residencies at various opportunities. During this trip, we learned about the variety and complexity of South African research institutions, and we were spoiled by the warm and friendly welcome of the scientists. From our perspective, a very promising context for this first Artists in Labs Residency Exchange between South Africa and Switzerland seemed to be the field of astronomy. In South Africa, it is an important focus that has been built up over a long period of time.
As our collaborations are based on exchange and dialogue and most of all, I think, learning from each other, to find the matching scientific partners are, of course, key for our residencies. So the South African Astronomical Observatory in Cape Town, the South African Large Telescope SALT, and a number of smaller telescopes near the village of Sutherland in the Karoo Desert provided this ground to host an artist. Meanwhile, in Switzerland, the Astronomy Department of the University of Geneva, with its outstanding research on exoplanets and finding new exoplanets, so that planets outside our solar system, provided another inspiring context for artists. In an open call for project ideas, both George Mahashe and Vanessa Lorenzo's projects have been selected by a jury, and it is amazing to witness and participate in how their collaborations into unknown territory, and here I mean the sites, tools and methodologies of the scientific fields, has developed. It has pushed the boundaries of their interactions, and their process and dedication are truly interfacing new heavens since their 3 months residencies in South Africa and Switzerland in 2018. And now since 2020, a new endeavor and the exchange has started with the Javed Art Center in Pretoria and the University of Pretoria. And today it is, and with today's launch in the virtual space, it is that we are connecting the particles or the dots with a public. And it is the starting point of an extended dialogue on and on. As you can imagine, there are a lot of people, institutions, and more than human entities that have contributed to make this collaborative seed bloom, make us learn daily. And therefore, I would like to take this opportunity to thank, before we start with the real thing, the amazing Javed Art Center team and University of Pretoria, with Sinetemba, Daniel, Gabi, and Lechoto, for pushing this project to new heavens and giving it a home for the artistic processes and artworks of George and Vanessa in the digital and in the physical space later on. Also, a big thank to Joseph Gaillard. He is the head of the Royal Helvetia Johannesburg, and his team. Thank you for your trust and believing in this long-term project and opening doors to institutions and the art scene in Johannesburg and all over South Africa. And of course, providing us also with the necessary funding. Our scientific partners, SAAO and the Astronomy Department, for welcoming Vanessa and George, and very special thanks to the scientists Petri Väisänen, Daniel Kunama, Nicolas Erasmus, and Kevin Governor from the South African Astronomical Observatory. And on the Swiss side, Stéphane Udry, Nicolas Bio, and Bruno Jasla from the Astronomy Department of the University of Geneva. Last but not least, Jackie Friedenthal and the Embassy of Switzerland for the continuing supporting networking with science institutions and also supporting the project with funding. I'm really looking forward now to this talk and where heaven and earth actually meets somewhere in this space. Thank you.
We give it over to the artists to begin their presentations. We will start with George Mahashe, and he will speak a bit on his project, Lebitla Langaka. Okay, George, welcome.
Thank you, Sinetemba. I'm going to share my screen. And I'll just have this in the background. There is not much to my website. For me, I think, or actually, let me restart. George Mahashe Beuyabulobedu. So we just clear that. So I think to come back to this story, and for me, it's really a story. In 2018, one evening I had a random dream, a very random dream. And with this dream, I dreamt of Orion's belt. And I dreamt of a particular geographic, or rather a particular location within Orion's belt. And within that dream, I then was woken up. And by chance, I looked at Facebook and there was a call for applications for interfacing New Heavens. I went back to sleep and I proceeded to dream my proposal for the call. Of course, my proposal was that I wanted to explore the concept of Mujaji. Mujaji, I will not call her Rain Queen, I will call her by the name Mujaji. And Orion's belt, which Balobedu and other Southern African cultures call the Gulubiana or the Gulube or Magulube. And this is what I wanted to research. And in going through the website for the University of Geneva's Astronomy Department, I was fascinated by their exoplanet department or research group. And I proposed to spend some time with that group looking for this particular area of space that I had dreamt. And that's how I entered this project. In my first week there, I realized that the area of space that I was interested in was so vast that to even, like in my dream, the space is so small. And they basically introduced me to the idea that for, let's just say, between two stars in Orion's belt, that area was so vast that even if I had 10 years and access to their telescope, for me to map that area would take forever. So within the first week of arriving there, I understood that I was not necessarily going to do the project that I was looking for. But at the same time, the department was very big on lunch and coffee. And what happened for the next 3 months was that I spent the next 3 months basically having lunch, having coffee with the different PhD students, postdoc students, professors, talking about the different aspects of astronomy observation, the question of how do I know, or how does my culture know what is in that particular geographic area? Because obviously and you'll forgive me because there's not much I can say, and that will tie to the website. And it's not because one is not allowed to say, that's never the case. But for me, it became a question of, in having these conversations, I would test out and try to articulate what I thought I understood from my dream. And I would say, okay, in my dream, I saw X, Y, Z. And they will say, right, to see X, Y, Z, this and this and this and this and this needs to be in place. So basically, my lunch was me pitching possibilities to the scientists and then telling me that, or rather how it was impossible to do any of that. But within that context, there was one scientist who was responsible for writing the code and managing the command center for the university's new satellite telescope that launched last year. And with this, his name was Nicola. And with him, every day we would have the conversations. And every day he would remind me that, George, you're not here to pretend to be a scientist, but you are a very knowledgeable person in your own right. So I'm interested in what is it that you want to do. So I began to tell him a series of stories, lots of tangents. So another thing that I did is I spent a lot of time watching YouTube videos, which I really love. And I spent a lot of time watching and rewatching Credo Mutwa's different YouTube videos, somewhat problematic, somewhat interesting, but my relationship with Credo Mutwa as an academic figure is interesting because I knew him first as one of the first people to critique what everybody today in the 1970s is calling reflexivity. So I spent a lot of time listening to his videos, and within his videos, he had a very interesting prompt. And he basically pointed out that for my generation, and in fact, most of the people that are gifted in the way that some of us are, most of us are, we will never really understand what lies waiting for us in storerooms in Europe when we are going through our artifacts, because our conception of these artifacts does not go beyond the ritual. And it became a question of observation, which had been a question that got me started on the project in the first place. It was a question of how do we see, how do we imagine? And for me, I think the time that I spent there really reminded me to not to try and be somebody else or to be a scientist, but to remember who I was, but to understand that in being who I was, I should use all the technology at my disposal. So first thing that I did was I created an object in Ode of Credo Mutwa. And it is a disc, which I call Lirumo, but it is also a very ambitious telescope. And it's one of the projects that is hidden and embedded in this website. And since then, I've been trying to comprehend a series of artifacts. One of them is currently also on show as part of Handle with Care, called Mashogojo. And it is a bracelet called Bakalaga, which is central to comprehending the cosmos. So over this period, over the last 2 years, I've been trying to make key artifacts that unlock aspects of what I experienced in the time that I was at the observatory. And I think I'm going to stop there because I have thrown too many things on the table, and let me use that as a way of getting to the website. The website, ultimately, it's a story that is evolving. Within the story, there are clickable areas. And some of these clickable areas will give you something that the scientists very quickly picked up as metadata. And everybody would be like, George, I hear you, but you keep telling us all these surrounding information. You never get to the thing. You never get to the thing. What is this obsession with metadata? And for me, as somebody that is interested in Kilobedu, and specifically at the moment interested in understanding how Kilobedu forces me to be a transdisciplinary person. Because for me to understand Kilobedu, I have to learn anthropology, I have to learn linguistics, I have to learn astronomy, I have to learn many disciplines. So for me to understand Kilobedu, I needed to become very comfortable with information that doesn't lead anywhere. Because for the information to lead somewhere, there must be a specific object that you're looking for. And Balobedu, for me, are specialists of not having a specific object. So for me, the project or rather what I try to do in Libitala Langaka is to imagine what an archive that is not meant to give you an answer, but an archive that's meant to to raise questions or take you on a whole lot of tangents and travels looks like. So what I've put on the table is a series of texts, websites that might take you to places that might allow you over time, because that's another thing, for you to understand the project, which I still don't understand, you need to also commit to time. You need to commit to spending time going nowhere. So what I put here is a text that has areas that you can click, and in places they are hidden. I mean, let me not talk too much. There are spaces that are hidden, or not hidden, but there are spaces that you can click on that will either download a file, pop up a window, and those things, if you follow them closely, at some point as the project unfolds, you will be able to understand what I'm looking for. And I think to try and just maybe close, because I've spewed a lot of things on the table. For me, the concept of Livita, right, comes from a comment by Credo Muta, who basically pointed out he's got this beautiful copper artifact, and he tells a beautiful story about how a missionary tried to dispossess him of it. And he says that should he die, and a specialist, an expert, Ngaka, does not appear before he dies, he should be buried, that artifact should be buried under him. And at some point, his successor should find that artifact by digging it up. So for me, I've always been fascinated by questions of Mavita Ngaka. And it starts with a story about Daja, which is a particular forest in Balobedu where the Balobedu kings are buried, as we are in the time when Balobedu are proposing to have a king. Very controversial, I shall not talk about it. There's a place where the kings are buried, and if you walk through that place, it's said that you cannot see what is there, meaning that there is an apparition that basically cloaks that place from vision. And if you are lucky enough to be able to see what is there, you might find some of their artifacts that might allow you to access some Kilobedu history. So for me, the question of a grave, of not even a grave, of a vault of Livita, let's just call it Livita. The fascination with Livita is that question of what type of storerooms are out there, what kind of what kind of apparitions cloak them, and how do we become able to observe the space in a way that we are able to see what is there that is not necessarily seeable. So to wrap up this mess of a story I've tried to tell, I will say that the time that I spent with the scientists reminded me that it is not, the sciences are not interested in having conversations with artists, with indigenous communities, for those communities to pretend to be scientists, but they are interested in having conversations with people that take themselves seriously, because scientists take themselves seriously. And from spending some time with them, there's a lot of imagination that happens. And the space between their imagination and them finding proof of their imagination is the part that is important. So I am going to stop talking and to just say, keep coming back, click on the few links that are there, see what is there, and keep coming back to see what else I put there. And most of it will really be me trying to understand the story that really requires volumes to sketch out. So I will stop talking now. And thank you.
Thank you, George. Thank you so much for that. We will pass it over to Vanessa. She will begin her conversation with a collaborative discussion about her installation with her various collaborators. Welcome,
Hello.
Vanessa.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Sinetemba. So my name is Vanessa Lorenzo. I'm based in Lausanne, in Switzerland. I'm an independent artist. Right now, I'm calling you from Barcelona. I'm temporarily here, making another project between art and science. That's actually the core of my practice. And the way I started working at the crossroads of new media, science, biology, and technology, it was because I started trying to generate or to create objects or languages or way to communicate with a more than human other, meaning machines at the beginning, then objects, other non-human animals, plants, bacteria, and in this case, rocks and asteroids, with the Artist in Labs program since 2018. And I always thought that how we consciously perceive the other, whatever that other is a way to overcome human exceptionalism. As Sinetemba told before, quoting, I think, Donna Haraway, and the Planteocene or the Anthropocene, let's call it like this, where we are in the center of everything, so full of our egos, and that we just forgot how to communicate. And when I say we, I'm very conscious that I'm located in in Europe. Our culture is specifically anthropocentric and human exceptionalists. And so for me, the way to approach technology is to try to appropriate this technological apparatus. Well, first to understand it, because it's another language, in order to enter the semiosphere of the more than human other. Try to, the technological and the scientific apparatus is quite precise or specific to find other or understand this semiology of other species and other agents. And on the other hand, I was inspired by this panpsychism, is the philosophy of the belief that every agent has consciousness and therefore can perceive their environment and what is around them. And therefore, it's an agent that can be communicated with, we can communicate or can communicate something to us. And the way I approached the asteroids and the rocks in this context of Anthropocene, ecological emergency and need to overcome human exceptionalism was like, how would I first understand the language of an asteroid? And then I spent a few weeks in the Karoo Desert in Sutherland, and also at this SAO facilities, and also in the Carnarvon SKA facilities with the radio telescopes, and learning about how these gigantic machines were like big ears and big eyes to see then seen and to hear then heard. And my first step was always calling home, was to translate this data sonification into this data into sounds. And the storytelling behind it was about that these rocks will carry memories of the planets from which they were expelled or extracted. And they are wandering or floating in the space, and sometimes some of them, they hit our atmosphere and they come to the earth, and they carry a lot of memories, a lot of living or xenobiology, extraterrestrial life. And so the first step was always calling home, like trying to understand their language.
And now, like over the years, in 2019, I made several sound sculptures and videos that you can see on the Artfundi website about an archipelago of rocks floating in the space, in a virtual space, that were writing an open letter manifesto that they wanted to become the Republic of the Archipelago. It's a sort of the first exploration of radical togetherness and how to be radically kind and open to understand and find new ways to collaborate and communicate in a context of post-Anthropocene, post-colonialism, and and shifting from the humanist eye. So we are talking to others, and therefore we need to find other strategies. And so I want to also to introduce for this last step of the project, which is going to be presented in the Jabadab Center in July. It's a constellation of artists from both South Africa and Switzerland. And we thought that it would be a very cool idea to say hi from the virtual space. So now I'm gonna share my screen and we can see my collaborators here. We can see Martin over there. And I guess it's Natalie over there, or San. Natalie. Okay, guys, you can say hi to the audience. Okay. Hey. Well, so just for you to let you know that we are working overseas since the pandemic has restricted a lot our movement, and the way we used to collaborate is not possible anymore. And therefore we invented new ways of working together with rocks, with texts, with voice snippets, text, video calls, and so right now, yeah, I think I'm gonna stop sharing the screen. People are running around. I don't know what's going on, but anyways, that was a way to try to show you how challenging, but also how rich it is to work nowadays with this global pandemic, and try to flip the situation and find new platforms. At this stage, and I'm gonna now concentrate on the new phase of the project. We are collaborating with another 7 artists for a sound collection. So to sort of new memories of rocks that will be launched in a public event at the end of the next month. As well, we were working with real meteorites and making an ethnographic research about internet niches of YouTubers making DIY terrariums for meteorites, Facebook groups to hunt meteorites and make public auctions, people making ASMR videos licking rocks, geophagia, and also scientists and geologists teaching how to characterize rocks by licking them. For me, that was like the next step and very important step in order to grasp another way to interact with rocks through licking, not only through hearing, and also on the way I found a sort of a niche of xenocapitalism, in the sense, so xenocapitalism is capitalism or ways to trade with assets beyond our planet. And these Facebook groups or forums on the internet were made by very, very committed hobbyists and also scientists obsessed by finding chunks or pieces, fragments of other worlds, and making sure that they are authentic. And there is a crazy movement about people really wanted to acquire a piece of the moon or Mars. And so with Natalie, we are making an ethnographic fiction about a community, a cult that want to engage differently with these assets, with these agents, and how they go from engaging it as material, then understanding that they bring rich biodiversity, nutrients, and then after it, they valued these materials as part of an archipelago community of people, or more than human people. And with Martin, we are making a terrarium for a meteorite. It's a real meteorite that we acquire through these channels that I told you before, these Facebook groups. So we want to cultivate the alien life that this meteorite could carry. So we expect to have a little algae or lichens growing on this rock on site on the Javedat Center for 6 months. It's going to be an ongoing development. So it's an unfolding ontology from a rock into something that is alive, and it's alien, but it's going to be part of us because it's going to be there in the center for a long time. Just to say that I'm not physically right now there. I never seen the meteorite, and everything is done and trusted through the peers of the group of the collaborators. Yeah, hopefully we will gather together at some point and in the same room to discuss about the project. I think, yeah, in the last part, I talked about Sanel and Gubane, that is, it's collaborating with us for the sound collection. So we will generate new sounds and noises from the space, a new conversation amongst the archipelago of meteorites, and also Mathilde Buenard, who studied with me at the HEAD Geneva back in 2016, and she is now collaborating with me on the online interactive installation of Always Calling Home. I'm gonna share the screen again, and you can see in the Javedat Art Funditech website, you can see the blog post Always Calling Home, the collaboration with Natalie, a hotspot for xenobiodiversity, and also the web installation or sound sculpture made with Mathilde, alwayscallinghome.io. And the web installation, it's already online and running. You just need to click on the picture, allow the the camera to interact with you and start moving your hands. Every rock is gonna give a different noise and perception of the space, and all this data sorry. And this data, just to remind you that everything comes from tons and tons and gigabytes of light data from the telescopes in Sutherland. I think that's everything from my side.
Thank you, Vanessa. Well, I'll proceed by asking you a question and kind of begin a question and answer session, and then we'll open the floor up to the audience to also pose questions, and you guys might respond to them. So I am interested in your proposition in imbuing extraterrestrial matter with a certain anthropomorphic quality. The project also allows one the possibility to think and dwell within a liminal state of hybridity when one broaches the more than human. Can you talk a bit about your working process and how, you know, the pieces came to be, or the collaborations and interactions also with your collaborators?
Sorry, could you make the question again? I was telling my collaborators that they could get out of the cyberspace. They were wandering around.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. So I was saying that I'm interested in your proposition where you imbue matter and I guess extraterrestrial objects with this anthropomorphic quality through, you know, them collaborating well. It's a sort of forced collaboration with like these human entities. Could you maybe dwell and think about the state of hybridity where you then propose a life for the more than human? And also then how has that process been with your collaborators and how have they responded to the objects themselves?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a very interesting and complicated question. Hybridity is part of my obsession, I would say. My artist name is Hybridoa, although I don't use it a lot. Yeah, I mean, the practice itself is hybrid, which is, I think, is not necessarily bad. I think actually it's pretty beneficial because it gives tolerance to learn new things. And as George was saying before, you don't have to be an expert to dive into a matter or a subject. Also, hybridity challenges per se your subjectivity. So you have to question all the time who you are in the space, who you are in the context. And this allows you to position and to see the hierarchies and to see the togetherness and to see also the possible alliances that you can make with the other. Even if it's technology, objects, matter, or other collaborators, I think it's always the same strategy. And I think I said it since I arrived I started the Artist in Labs residency back in 2018. Then I came back to Johannesburg in 2019 for the Fakugesi. For me, it was really like being an alien emerged, popped up in a context that it was very transactional. It was not only between art and science. It was about different languages, different cultural backgrounds, and I would say that hybridity, also feminism, I would say, or ecofeminism, was a huge element of radical togetherness, because I think feminism, or transfeminism, to be more precise, tells you or pushes you or invites you to analyze your own privilege, and that's when, and what is natural and what is not natural. I think that's a very good reflection nowadays, to embrace the otherness within ourselves and also in the others. So I will leave it there.
Well, my next question kind of then broached what you just started talking about. Well, I guess you trouble the idea of location, right? And and within the title itself, the idea is that the celestial matter in its remoteness is always calling home, right? And grappling with this idea of dislocation and otherness. So you've kind of utilized, like, you know, the elements of biodesign, you've thought about the sonic space, voice and vibration to trouble the idea of like boundary and place. Can you maybe think about it in relation to also then how you then situate yourself within these works and like within these installations, and how has that transformed you, not only your process, but you yourself, and like thinking about subjectivity also?
Yeah. It's very difficult to have a non-human experience or a more than human experience when you are a human. So, and I say this because, I mean, it's the question is all the time coming, like, yeah, we must think about not human exceptionalism and think beyond humanist I. And the way actually, I don't think I do it by myself. I think the more than human other I'm working with, technology always puts my ego in place. Technology always crashes. Technology always has its own way of making you vulnerable. And when you add a natural element, like for example, when I work with plants and I work with rocks, with sensors all together, the gestures that I try to make, they're very humble. Like for example, in Always Calling Home, it was this gesture of caressing without touching the rock, so the sensor will be activated. It's a sort of a humbleness that I try to perform. In the website, you can see the points of your fingers that are tracked through the camera. So it's a little bit, although it's aesthetic of, you know, this flashy green and vape wave that I totally took from Natalie. I really like Natalie Panang, the collaborator. Yeah.
Touching the microphone. Yes.
So everything is like allow ourselves to explore, not be fearful of seeming a little bit naive or a little bit like super vulnerable, or yeah, it's something new. We're exploring new ways of exploring the otherness and communicating with the other. So the gestures, I think the gestures should be humble and subtle. In this, I mean, I understand it like this.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to George. George, I begin, in a sense, I think I understand your intention and greater project as being concerned with Gelobedu, right? And at the heart of Gelobedu, as we had spoken about many times, and also beginning from like our interactions a few years ago, particularly with the Jerusalem project, the Jerusalem show project, the Camera Obscura that you'd created. You know, there's always like a method of some sort that you're trying to discern in order to like view stars or to like to think about observation anew in a sense. Can you elaborate in a sense about these processes and also objects of observation as sites of encounter, or thinking about them for yourself as sites of encounter?
Right. Thanks for the question. I think the question of observation is an important site for changing the politics that we find ourselves in, because if one had to really put a finger as to what is colonial in our world, it is the tyranny of a particular understanding of observation. And for me, photography has always been the epitome of that tyranny. And of course, photography is much more interesting than that capacity for tyranny. So for me, I've always been interested in the camera obscura, which is something that was invented. By the way, a camera obscura is when you are in a dark room and there's a small hole that lets everything outside inside. And for me, my fascination with the camera obscura starts when I understand that what we now call a camera was at one time, I think sometime in the 1200s, a device for observing a solar eclipse. So it was used as an observation technology. But what is interesting about the camera obscura is that it is not interested in making a permanent record. So it's not interested in representation, but rather it is interested in the act of seeing, which I think for me, the tyrannical aspect of photography is in its ability to prevent us from seeing by forcing us to only receive an image that has been seen by somebody else. So for me, I think the camera obscura offers an opportunity to retrain ourselves to relate with an image in a live mode, in a way where it is not about, okay, cool, I don't have to pay attention right now because I can always see the record of what I am seeing elsewhere. So for me, there's something important about the camera obscura's capacity to remove us from that aspect of photography, that, and it's a minor aspect, but it's an aspect that has been centralized in our cultures. So there, for me, there's that aspect of the camera obscura. On the other hand, the camera obscura is significant because how I come to the camera obscura is because during my PhD project, I encountered a rumor of a dream. So I was researching a photographic archive from I think it was from the 1894. And I was looking for photographs of a group of Balobedu that had gone to Berlin as part of a missionary exhibition or a missionary show. And in the process, when I was very frustrated with the restrictive capacity of photography, I discovered that, or rather not discovered, that's a terrible word. I understood that one of the people that had been to Berlin had a dream that they had spoken about, and the missionary found it interesting to record, and missionaries recorded very specific things. Every record was designed to be some sort of proof in the future. But of course, I never find the dream. And being the person that I am, I start practicing dreaming. And we all dream, but we don't really practice dreaming. You know, we do dreaming as a function of the body. Whereas for me to start taking seriously the practice of dreaming, you know, resting your body so that by the time you sleep, you have a more vivid, lucid dream that you remember. So for me, when I started dreaming, I found that my understanding of the dreamscape, I found that I would have a problem with when I wake up understanding that how I understand something was not because I saw it in a dream, but because I heard something in a dream. So for me, the process of dreaming awakened my capacity to realize that we like to talk about audiovisual, or the multi-sensory experience.
An embodiment of many senses.
So for me, until I started dreaming, I didn't really take seriously this thing that an image can be drawn from the sonic or from a smell, because you smell a lot of things in a dream. But of course, because we are trained to recall our dreams as a vision, we always reduce it to a dream. So for me, there's something about dreaming that changes our capacity to understand what is observable. So for me, I think that is something that was particularly interesting for me. So I think in my work, I try to think about how do we observe? And of course, when I started speaking with the scientists, and I mean, okay, cool. I tell stories, right? I have a dream, and the dream is of a star. Conventionally, I should have just gone to Moria. I should have gone to Moria at a site where a meteorite has fallen, and my journey would have been complete. So I have a dream and I end up in Geneva. I basically get lost. But anyway, to get back to the story, is there's something about the way that dreaming requires particular type of artifact. So for me, the question of observation is also around, there is the technology that we are used to, which is photographic. If you think about detection technology in general, it has an aspect of the photographic. It has the aspect of recording for later vision. But for me, what has become interesting is an understanding that our bodies are a particular type of detector. And for me, within Kilobedu, within Southern Africa, there is a practice of assisting the body in its capacity to detect. And I don't know if I'm answering your question, but for me, the question of observation is a question that requires us to remove ourselves from a particular imagining of what observation is and think something else. Because if I give another example, one of the most instructive encounter during my time with the scientist was me trying to convince a young PhD student that during the rain season, Balobedu will look at a particular star, and depending on how that star flickered, they could tell where the drought would come from and how long it would last. And of course, they were like, no ways, there's no way you can predict, the star flickers because of telluric interference. And, they gave me all sorts of reasons why, but there was one particular student that then made me, her name is Julia Seidel. She's just received her PhD 2 weeks ago. And she's been one of the more key conversations there. She was like, right, you have telluric interference in itself is an observation, platform, because telluric interference is basically the moisture that is in the air. So the atmosphere in itself is a lens. So, to start to think about, okay, cool, if the atmosphere is the lens, Balobedu must have had some conception of how to read a star based on a particular, and when we start to go deeper into my quest and my interest in Malemba and the observatories in Bambanyalo, there is an obsession, or rather a fascination, with using a rainforest as an observation platform. So I don't know, I've gone, you know, I suffer from this and I've tried to be concise, but for me, there's a way in which we are called to think more broadly about what it means to observe. And yeah, I think I've put too many things on the table, so I return it back to you.
Well, it's been quite generative, but I'll leave the conversation there and open it up for the audience. There are more questions, but we'll allow people to ask questions and also to interact with both you and Vanessa. Thank you, George.
Maybe I can also add a question on what George was talking about. Actually, you were talking also about this this meeting of different knowledge systems that you kind of link also with your practice, and then you being at the Astronomy Department in Geneva. And oh, Vanessa's back too. So it's actually for both of you a bit. I would be interested, how do you see that almost like ethical perspective on handling different knowledge system when they come together in an exchange like that? So if you come as an outsider, let's say, to a science institution, what is your way to engage with that knowledge and to include it into your practice? And what would be also your expectation, let's say, from the scientist to include your knowledge in their practice, or how they would talk about what you bring to the table?
I don't know if I go first. I think for me, it's not so much a question of inclusion, but rather a question of increasing capacity to collaborate. So I think for me, one of the things that is most pressing has become a question of how, you know, if I speak first as an artist, is how do artists have access to better funding in terms of our capacity to engage in our research without being guests. So I think the ethical question ultimately will be resolved by a more democratic distribution of funding between the sciences, the arts, between the community formations. So for me, that's how one should, or rather that's how I would answer that question. Is for me, it was always a question of, if you are being invited to contribute, it becomes problematic. So we need to get to a point where there is a capacity for artists and indigenous knowledge bearers. The indigenous knowledge concept is quite complex for me, to have a capacity to contribute and conversate without being invited. And I think I'm answering a quarter of your question, but in the interest of time and Zoom fatigue, I will say, for me, the conversation really depends on an equitable distribution of funding. And we need to think of a model where arts, indigenous knowledge systems are funded in the same way as the sciences are funded, particularly when scientists are taking seriously how and what artists and indigenous communities know. So I think that would be my contribution to that comment.
Okay. I have another question that is more related to like your long-term artistic research and explorations into your questions, and now going into the museum and kind of present or share your processes and embodied, or I don't know, materialized knowledge or interpretations. What kind of can you share maybe a little bit about this process, or is there something that changes, or the way you focus on like this very long-term research you've been doing?
I don't know if I grasp the question. Are you basically asking me the effect of an ongoing process, which for me is the key methodology? I think there's always pressure to give immediate results. And for me in particular, with this contribution to this show, is to demand, if one can call it that, space to do it slowly. To say that, yes, I spent 3 months talking to astrophysicists, and I've spent the last 2 years developing a conversation with some of the people that I've been engaging in conversation to some of the scientists that I met. But I think there is a need to not rush. And my artistic methodology, if one can call it that, is one of really taking time. And taking time doesn't mean not producing, but taking time means taking time to build, because I think it's a question of building a language. The sciences have been building a language for a very long, or a language that everybody can access for the longest of time. How does the arts, how does the indigenous knowledge systems build a platform or a language that allows them to say what they know without having to rely on other languages? So I think, yeah, I have a tendency to not answer questions.
Vanessa, would you like to maybe also, I don't know if you have heard the question before.
My connection was a bit unstable, so I apologize for disconnecting briefly. I didn't hear quite a question, sorry.
Okay, it was really like from the spaces where you were researching and you've been doing your research on, like, now a very long term basis that was actually starting before the residencies, and now going into like the museum or space of maybe display or space of like museum, and sharing your processes with a public. What kind of thoughts, or what is changing when you're thinking about going into this space?
Well, for me, I come from the context of hacking and DIY-ology and workshopology, meaning that that was my space before I had this opportunity to enter a lab, was creating a lab, a kitchen, a community lab with less resources. And the reason was because I truly believe, so right now I'm in a hacker space, for example. I'm making this Zoom from a hacker space, meaning that this is where I started making my practice and workshopology. So making workshops with the people, with the community. It was always a way to transfer the knowledge that I was able to acquire, appropriate from the lab, which I take it as a restricted place where not everyone is allowed to enter. And therefore, the question I'm gonna answer it from that point of view. For me, exhibitions and public events and workshops, or in activities with the public, like really one-to-one, are very precious to me, because it's the only moment where I think the knowledge that has been made can be transferred. So it's a moment of dissemination of new knowledge that you are bringing with, I mean, and I don't want to say like, here I come with the knowledge, go and take it, but it's a moment to really face to face or physically disseminate it and see how the project will be enriched, modified, altered, contributed by this interaction. So for me, it's a very good thing that we have the chance to present, because otherwise it's quite elitist. It keeps like the knowledge, it cannot go to the people at the end, and this is for me the final step, like either through fictional storytelling or either through speculative interactive objects. There is every time a narrative behind that wants to speculate and create a new social imaginary, like take a problematic or take a question, take an issue, take a concern in the present and try to push it a little bit in the near future, try to explore the tools, the technological apparatus, the scientific apparatus that we can access or appropriate, why not, in order to understand better and expand the possibilities of those tools, which are not neutral, and by us, not scientists, using those apparatus and those tools and making art pieces or storytelling, fiction, film, poems, whatever, we are enlarging, we are appropriating a future, and we are somehow taking our place in the future that we want to have our place in. And in this case, it's through this new media, and when I have the chance, this scientific apparatus, that I can do it, and at the end, the final moment to present and to have a public event or a one-to-one meeting or a workshop is the most interesting part, even if super stressful, because you have to go from epistemic object, a non-defined story, a non-defined object, with its unfolding ontology, the technical object, and then you have a final object defined that you can disseminate. You can say, hi, this is what I think I know, and this is the story that I built together with these people, these collaborators, or myself alone, and this is what I show to the public. Yeah. Sorry, sorry, Sinatemba. There was a question on the chat by Nolene Murray.
Okay. Her question for you is there a connection between your making of non-anthropocenic landscapes and alternative futures with other genres of futurism in fiction, film, and fantasy?
Mm-hmm. And I really like this question. I don't know nothing about, I don't know much about futurism. I think it's a concept in itself of discussion. But I do know about speculative design. I come from industrial design, and speculative design, it's about taking a contemporary issue in a social cultural context, geopolitical context, analyze the tools that can analyze the issue and push it in a near future, as I said before, and imagine an object, an installation, a service, a speculative product, or speculative storytelling in the future that will talk about this issue. And in those realms, for me, fiction or speculative fiction, speculative design are very much linked, because when we think about a speculation, we take ourselves a huge tolerance for ourselves to move in between and to navigate non-anthropocentric landscapes, radical critical landscapes, very uncomfortable landscapes. So the fiction, I would say, and the sun, let's say like this future that is not yet, so you have to invent language, objects, the ways to communicate with each other. Yeah, I read a lot of science fiction as well, and more women from women writers. I recently did a workshop from the Butler, a story about people losing their capacity to communicate. I think it's a speech sounds. I'm very bad with names. And for me, all these kind of like contexts in which we imagine new ways of communicating, of being with the other, it allows us to imagine the world that is around, is wrapping up this situation, the objects, the transport, the politics, how the people will react or be with each other. Are they violent? Are they kind to each other? So this is about, for me, fiction and future thinking and modern human scenarios give me tolerance to explore without having so much maybe backlash if I would be talking about the present situation. So
there's another question in the audience from Cass. Hello, Cass. He's asking, how does one overcome the assumed dilution of the knowledge, language, products gained through deep, intense, other than obvious processes once it's located in a fleeting visitor experience in the gallery space? So I pose the question for both George and Vanessa.
Vanessa, do you want to go first, please?
no, please go first. Okay, I will.
Okay.
For me, I think the answer is it's gonna be quite short. I think there is no control of what, or there should be not much control of what the people would understand and how they will interpret the project. And yeah, so I think that's positive. If there is delusion, you just let go that knowledge, and it's gonna be the knowledge of someone else, and it's gonna be evolving in another shape.
I think for me, I would take issue with the question of fleeting. And I don't think, for me, art is not really about a holistic experience. I think when somebody enters a space and they encounter something, no matter how small, no matter how fleeting, it's the responsibility of the person, of the audience, to sort of be aware of how that little fleeting encounter. So I don't take issue with the question of fleeting, but I take issue with an assumption that fleeting is not, it's not comprehensive. So for me, once you've encountered something in a museum space, no matter how small, as an audience, it is your responsibility to be aware how that small little zip file and there are zip files hidden in the text, by the way, how that small little encounter allow you to unpack it over time. So for me, an artwork is not something you consume in a short space of time. It is something that you engage over and over and over and over, So as an artist, I definitely expect you as the audience to be aware of how your encounter with something small that resonates with you evolves over time. And you know, I have works that I saw 10 years ago that I'm only starting to comprehend today. You know, a video work that I did not even look at for more than 5 minutes that I've gone searching for 10 years later, because only now I've got the tools to unpack it. So yeah, that would be me.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're gonna close it there. We'll leave it with more things to think about rather than finding solutions. I thank the artists, George and Vanessa, for their time and interacting with us. I also thank Florin and Irene for their time and the collaborative process we've taken going about the process of initiating this project. Hopefully we see all of you on the 17th of July at our opening. It might be a soft opening due to regulations, but hopefully one crosses fingers. Thank you, everyone.